My name is Calla Bordie. I'm a garment artist based in Chicago, Illinois, and I have a practice focused on mask making, thinking about the concepts of movement and play and persona. So most of my masks are made in the same procedure, using the same method to pattern, and the pattern that I have is this one. So I start by draping it on my own head, and I've done this too many times to count because I always misplace my patterns, and it goes like these. So first I'll start with my fabric, and luckily, since I've been keeping my hair long for the past several years, I'm able to use bobby pins and just pin it along the center line of my head. And eventually I have to pinch some fabric away to make it more round, and then I can cut it off of my head and figure out if it lays right by making a mock-up, and then cut my mock-up out, figure out where I want this start, which you might be able to see I moved, and then bam, I made it into a paper pattern. And so then from this paper pattern I can make any measure of things, or I can embellish the plain head shape with different textures or with other pattern manipulation tactics. So here is a really basic example of just fully embellishing one of these head shapes. You can see the muslin lining was simply this mask pattern sewn together, and then instead of changing anything, or in this case finishing anything fully, I just sewed a bunch of a different fabric on top, and that's how I gave it texture. Some more complicated pattern manipulation examples are this mask, which I cut the face hole out of and added these horns, and then this one, which also ended up with a face hole cut out so that I could see through. I filled it with mesh, and a more thorough back slit so that this can fit multiple people with multiple sized heads. And then this final piece that I ended up taking my basic head shape and adding a tube on the front so that I could add some different texture or material within. Some different shapes that you could do instead of a full face mask could be something more like this muzzle that I made for a dog, a electric dog wrestling persona in a class that I had. Or it could be something a little more loose, like this mask, which I've always thought looks like a beehive, but some people can wear it in other ways if they get their hands on it, and it really is just a bunch of donuts that I sewed out of a sweater and sewed all together in these rows. And then it can also not involve any of this complicated draping on your own face by just being a sheet of fabric that you tie around your neck and give some eye holes. And so this is one of my favorite masks that I've ever made, and this is one that has the most personality for me. I kind of have this character of this socialite, this grandiose character in this mask. An important thing to understand about these masks, and experimenting with building personas and building disguises and building masks in themselves, is that they don't have to be out of materials that are inaccessible or expensive or anything. Like this favorite mask that I have is filled with these broken glasses that I found on the street and some toilet paper tubes that I taped together to be the eyes of the mask and hold out from my face, so that the mask has more volume than if it was just a sheet over the sides of my head. And then, this one that we saw earlier, this is zip ties and some leftover pleather that I had from something else. This was kind of made on a whim, and I ended up using some leftover zip ties like this teeny tiny size that was never useful for me in any other situation. And then I also just tend to collect nonsense that can become masks eventually. So at my work, we do a lot of packing of envelopes, so I have been collecting for several months now, with the help of my boss, who's very sweet. He used Mylar and plastic strips that come off of envelopes that I can eventually make into maybe another fringy mask or something else with a lot more movement and shine because of the really fun silver Mylar. To start making one of these patterns, I started out with just any rectangle of fabric I can find, which can be knit or it can be woven, so it can be stretchy or it can just be taut and you can smooth it around your head with darts, etc. My first step is taking the front corner of my fabric and lining the edge up with the center of my face. And unfortunately, I cannot bobby pin this to my face, but once I get up into my hairline, I can use bobby pins to secure it down. And it can start to lay flat, or you can move around the side of your head, smoothing it downwards or smoothing it towards the back, depending on where you want it to be most taut against your head or smooth. And so while I move back, my fabric wants to go this way, so I'm going to keep pinning diagonally around the back of my head. And then eventually it will be pretty secured so that I can start cutting off excess. So luckily I have a mask on right now and I can use a sewing pin to just secure this right here under my chin. And you could use a safety pin, or you could use even, you know, another paper clip down here, and I can start cutting away my excess fabric back here, which obviously gets kind of wonky if you're behind your head, but then it starts to get much more manageable over time. And so once I'm back here, I need to start deciding where to put a dart so that it lays flat over my head instead of giving me this extra balloony space. And so I really like when my darts point towards the back of my mask, but you can have them coming forward, you can go towards your neck and figure out how best it'll lay up against where you think you might embellish or where you're most concerned about. So I might start pinching back here and put another bobby pin. And then another important note is to figure out where your eyes are if you want to make some eye holes. On some of my early masks I made weird creepy eye-shaped eye holes, but I eventually got a little cuter, like these little round eye holes, by basically just finding where my eyes are looking whenever I look straight forward. And I'm wearing glasses right now, but if you have a pencil or a pen, that's probably a better idea. Just finding the very center and then figuring out how big I wanted these circles or a cute little eye hole. And since your head is round, it's not going to be a straight line all the way back unless you make it that way and just do some insane darts on the side. So I'm just going to start cutting back here and try to avoid my hair as best I can. And see if I can smooth out my pattern. And as I'm doing this, I can add more bobby pins since I was pinning lots of the excess fabric instead of this narrow center line that I'm trying to achieve. So I kind of like this center line that I have going with what I've cut off already, so now I'm mostly focusing on the line that I want at the bottom of my mask, which oftentimes mine kind of follows the jaw line just under the ear towards kind of the top of the nape of the neck. And I'm gonna try to solidify some darts by putting more bobby pins. If you have safety pins, See, I'm putting these perpendicular to the edge of the fabric, but if you have safety pins, you can go close to your head and follow the line of the dart instead of just making these points pointing straight into them. It looks like down here I'll probably need to make another dart along the face, or if I don't care to keep this a straight line, I can instead smooth from the side of my head and kind of curve this under my little chin, and then keep cutting my center line like I did around the back of my head. Look at this. I'll cut an excess this way, and then start cutting up. Alright, now that I feel relatively happy with my pinned side of my mask, I'll probably just take all my little pins and bobby pins out, and then I can sort out all of this nonsense that is supposedly going to be my beautiful dart to make it into a head-shaped thing. So I ended up adding this dart on my chin to fit around my glasses and my mask, and then here's my little eye hole, and then here is my silly bobby pin dart that I'm now going to kind of connect the dots at the end of the bobby pins and figure out where the end of my mask is. I also ended up cutting vaguely along my jawline, but you can also totally use a pen or a marker, or if you have some sewing pins or safety pins, kind of follow that line with those so that you're not accidentally cutting hairs off. Excuse me. But yeah, so for this, I can kind of just follow the lines of these pins because I know that I was putting the ends of them up against my head. So I know that there's supposed to be a little bit of room for a seam allowance in case I want to make this into the mock-up. But I can kind of just follow along these at the same distance from their points and eventually make it down to the little vertex of my dart. Here is my vaguely similar draft to my paper pattern that I already have. Here's the chin, here's the jaw, and here is the dart. And to figure out if this can be cleaned up or sorted out, I might sew a piece that's vaguely this shape, or I might end up kind of following my corners again and just smoothing this out as it is in this first draft. But hopefully I can eventually get something smooth enough that if I sew it in two halves and create a 3D shape, it can vaguely fit over a head form like this one does. And for some of them I do zippers, but it's really unnecessary. Usually if you leave enough of a space, they can get over your head. And oftentimes I just ended up using things I was excited about, like orange or this manipulation that I was messing with, and kind of just made them into things that I could perform with, play with, and wear, because that is my language. And I think using masks as a method to anonymity, which can also open up the world of performance and play for those of us that struggle to do that on our own, or feel, you know, like we can't like push the limits of our personality, it can really end up being a really fruitful practice just to kind of have a space to do things like that outside of our own, like, our own habits of persona and personality and performance and play. But hopefully this is a helpful method to make just even potentially just some like goofy handwork that will keep you busy and end up being a tactile object that you could perhaps find other things to do with, because it's also something totally functionable and wearable.